Nurse Elena Marsh stood in the marble corridor of the Coldwater County Courthouse with two officers gripping her arms like she was a criminal being marched to slaughter. Her blue scrubs were wrinkled from a 16-hour shift she hadn't been allowed to finish, her blonde ponytail coming loose. Her wrists reddened from handcuffs that had been removed only minutes ago. Behind her walked Fire Chief Donald Reyes, his dress uniform stiff with medals he'd never earned in combat, his jaw set with the satisfaction of a man who believed he'd finally won. Beside him, a young attorney named Marcus Webb clutched a folder of documents that would, in his estimation, end Elena Marsh's nursing career permanently. None of them noticed the tall, silver-haired man in a plain navy sport coat who had slipped quietly into the back row of the gallery, a man whose posture alone suggested he had spent 30 years being underestimated by people exactly like Chief Reyes. The courtroom smelled of old wood polish and fear. Judge Harold Whitfield sat elevated behind his bench, a man known throughout the county for his short temper and shorter patience, his white hair catching the light from the high windows as he glared down at the woman being led to the defendant's table. Elena had been arrested 3 days earlier after refusing to follow Chief Reyes's direct order to stop treating a burn victim at a warehouse fire scene. An order that, had she obeyed it, would have let a 19-year-old firefighter named Tommy Alvarez bleed out from an arterial wound the paramedics on scene had completely missed. She had pushed past the chief, applied a tourniquet with hands that didn't shake, and kept Tommy alive until the helicopter arrived. Reyes had called it insubordination. He had called it grounds for her medical license to be stripped. He had called the county prosecutor personally. "Ms. Marsh," Judge Whitfield began, his voice already sharp with irritation before she'd said a single word. "You stand accused of interfering with emergency operations, of exceeding your scope of practice at an active fire scene, and of assaulting a superior officer in the process." Elena's court-appointed attorney, a tired man named Sanders who'd clearly rather be anywhere else, opened his mouth to object, but Whitfield silenced him with a raised hand. "I've read the incident report. I've heard from the fire chief. What I want from you, Ms. Marsh, is an explanation for why you thought a scrub nurse had any business overriding trained emergency personnel." The word scrub nurse landed like an insult, precisely as intended, and a ripple of murmurs moved through the gallery. Elena kept her chin level and her eyes forward, the way she'd been trained to hold herself under pressure that would break most people. "Your Honor, I saved that boy's life," she said, her voice steady despite the exhaustion carved into her face. "The paramedics missed a femoral bleed under the burn dressing. If I'd waited for permission, Tommy Alvarez would be dead." Chief Reyes shot to his feet, his face reddening. "She shoved me, Your Honor. She physically shoved a superior officer and interfered with my command of that scene. This isn't the first time. She's always had this attitude, like she thinks she knows better than everyone around her, like she's some kind of soldier instead of a nurse." He spat the word soldier the way Whitfield had spat scrub nurse, and Elena felt something in her chest tighten, an old and practiced discipline keeping her expression flat. The judge nodded along with every word, clearly having decided this case before it walked through his door. Then Whitfield's eyes fell on something that seemed to offend him personally. A faded olive drab field jacket draped over Elena's shoulders, thrown on that morning over her scrubs because the courthouse holding cell had been freezing. It bore no rank insignia, no visible unit patches, nothing but a small embroidered name tape and a symbol so worn it was nearly illegible. "And what?" the judge said, leaning forward with theatrical disdain. "Is this costume you're wearing into my courtroom? Do you think dressing up like a soldier gives you the authority to override trained professionals, Ms. Marsh? Lose the jacket. I won't have mockery of our armed forces in my courtroom." The gallery tittered nervously. Elena's hand rose slowly to the collar of the jacket, and for the first time, something flickered across her carefully composed face. Not shame, but a flash of old grief, the kind that lives in the body long after the mind has learned to hide it. She began to slide the jacket off her shoulders, and that was the exact moment the man in the back row rose to his feet. He did it without hurry, without drama, the unhurried movement of someone who had commanded men in situations far more dangerous than a county courtroom. "Your Honor," the man said, his voice carrying effortlessly to every corner of the room without him raising it at all. "Before she does that, I'd like the court to know exactly what she's wearing." Judge Whitfield's gavel hand froze midair. Chief Reyes turned, confused, searching for whoever had dared interrupt. The stranger walked forward down the center aisle, and something about the way the bailiff instinctively straightened, the way even the court reporter's fingers paused over her keys, told everyone in that room that this was not a man to be trifled with. "My name is Rear Admiral Jack Coleman, United States Navy, Naval Special Warfare Command," he said, and the temperature of the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "And that jacket, Your Honor, belonged to Petty Officer First Class Daniel Marsh, a Navy SEAL who died pulling 3 of his teammates out of a burning vehicle in Kandahar province 8 years ago. I know because I was there. I watched him do it. And the woman you just ordered to remove his jacket in your courtroom is his widow, the only medic in that convoy who kept 2 of those men breathing until the medevac arrived, using training she got from watching her husband treat combat wounds on leave. The silence that followed was absolute, the kind of silence that comes not from confusion but from the sudden, sickening realization of just how badly a room full of people had misjudged someone standing right in front of them. If this story is gripping you the way it gripped us writing it, hit subscribe now, because what Admiral Coleman does next in this courtroom is going to leave you speechless, and you will not want to miss a single moment of it. Judge Whitfield's face had gone the color of old paper. "Admiral, I wasn't aware of any military connection to this case. Nothing in the file. Nothing in the file because nobody asked." Admiral Coleman cut in, his tone still level but carrying an edge now. The voice of a man who had spent 3 decades watching bureaucracies fail the people who deserved better. Nobody asked why a civilian nurse moved like she'd been trained under fire. Nobody asked why she didn't hesitate when everyone around her froze. You all saw a scrub nurse who got in the way. I see a woman who spent 4 years married to one of the finest operators I ever served with, who absorbed enough trauma medicine at their kitchen table to save 2 SEALs' lives in a burning Humvee, and who has apparently spent the years since his death quietly using that same training to save strangers, including, from what I've read in the incident report on the drive over here, a 19-year-old firefighter named Tommy Alvarez 3 nights ago. He turned to face Chief Reyes directly, and the fire chief, for the first time since the story began, looked genuinely uncertain of himself. "Chief, I read the paramedics' own supplemental report. It states the initial responders missed an arterial bleed. It states Ms. Marsh identified it, applied a tourniquet correctly, and maintained pressure until flight medics arrived. That is not insubordination, Chief. That is exactly the kind of decisive action that keeps young men from dying on scene while people argue about jurisdiction." Elena stood frozen at the defendant's table, the jacket still half off her shoulders, tears finally breaking through the composure she'd held since her husband's funeral. She hadn't told anyone in this town who Daniel had been, hadn't wanted the pity or the questions, hadn't wanted to be defined by a loss instead of by her own competence. She had simply carried what he'd taught her forward, quietly, stitch by stitch, patient by patient, letting the training be her tribute instead of the grief. Admiral Coleman walked to the defense table and stood beside her, close enough that the gesture itself was a statement. This decorated flag officer, standing shoulder to shoulder with a woman the court had just tried to humiliate. "Your Honor," he continued, "I flew in this morning because Daniel's old teammates, men who owe their lives to what this woman knows, called me the moment they heard she'd been arrested for saving another life. I'd ask the court to consider what actually happened here, not what it looked like on an incident report written by someone protecting his own liability." Judge Whitfield cleared his throat, visibly recalibrating in real time, the way powerful men do when they realize the ground beneath their certainty has shifted. "Chief Reyes," he said, his earlier sharpness now redirected entirely, "is there any indication in your report that Ms. Marsh's intervention was medically incorrect?" Reyes shifted uncomfortably. "No, Your Honor. The intervention was correct. Alvarez is stable because of it." "Then perhaps," the judge said, his voice dropping into something closer to genuine reflection, "the question this court should have asked from the beginning wasn't why a nurse exceeded her authority, but why the chain of command on that scene failed to recognize competent, life-saving action, when it was standing right in front of them." The gallery, which minutes earlier had tittered at Elena's expense, now sat in a hush that felt almost reverent. Sanders, Elena's attorney, finally found his footing and rose. Your Honor, given the Admiral's testimony and the paramedic's own supplemental report, the defense moves to dismiss all charges. Whitfield studied Elena for a long moment, and when he spoke again, his voice had lost every trace of its earlier contempt. Ms. Marsh, this court owes you an apology it cannot fully give in words, but I can give you this. All charges are dismissed, effective immediately, and I am ordering this court's own inquiry into the fire department's incident reporting practices. He paused, glancing at the jacket still draped over her shoulders. And Ms. Marsh, keep the jacket on. I was wrong to ask you to remove it. Some things earned in fire don't belong on any hanger. A sound rose from the gallery then, quiet at first. A few claps that built into something the bailiff didn't even try to silence. Chief Reyes sat rigid in his seat, the medals on his chest suddenly looking less like honors and more like the armor of a man who had never once had to prove himself the way the woman across the room had proven herself in a burning warehouse 3 nights earlier. Admiral Coleman placed a steady hand on Elena's shoulder, the same shoulder the jacket had rested on, and said quietly, just for her, "Daniel would be proud of you. He always said you had the steadiest hands he'd ever seen." Elena finally allowed herself to cry openly, not from the humiliation of the morning, but from the release of years spent carrying a legacy in silence. Finally seen, finally spoken aloud in a room full of strangers who would never look at her the same way again. Outside the courthouse, reporters had gathered, alerted by a bailiff who couldn't resist making a call. Tommy Alvarez's mother pushed through the crowd to embrace Elena, sobbing her thanks, and somewhere in that chaotic, sun-drenched moment, Elena Marsh understood that she would never again have to explain why she moved the way she moved, why her hands never shook, why she always knew exactly what to do when everyone else froze. The jacket stayed on her shoulders as she walked down the courthouse steps, Admiral Coleman beside her, and for the first time since Kandahar took her husband, she felt like she was walking forward instead of simply surviving. If this story moved you, if you believe quiet heroes deserve to be seen, subscribe to the channel right now and turn on notifications, because we bring you a new story of hidden heroism and hard-earned vindication every single week, and you will not want to miss what's coming next.